Ethan Caldwell had always lived by a simple philosophy: live and let live. His farm, a sprawling piece of land passed down through generations, was more than just a livelihood. It was a legacy, a testament to the hard work and resilience of his ancestors. Waking up on that chilly autumn morning, Ethan was ready to face the day, unaware that his world was about to be rocked by a call that would echo far beyond the boundaries of his property. He had just finished his morning routine, checking on the animals, inspecting the crops in the golden light, and was heading toward the barn when a piercing ring shattered the calm. The phone on his farmhouse desk vibrated insistently, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Before he could decide whether to answer, his ears caught the distant sound of frantic voices and blaring sirens. Across the way, through the thin layer of mist that clung to the fields, Ethan could see flashing red and blue lights converging on his property line. His heart sank as he pieced it together. Karen had called 911. The self-appointed enforcer of Crescent Meadows had, once again, taken it upon herself to police everything that didn't conform to her rigid standards. This time, however, her target wasn't a stray mailbox or a mismatched flower bed. It was Ethan's farm stand, a place where he sold fresh produce and handmade goods, a cornerstone of his family's legacy. In that charged moment, as the realization set in that Karen's latest crusade was about to turn his peaceful morning into chaos, a spark of defiant inspiration ignited in Ethan. He remembered the countless times he had endured fines and baseless complaints, each one a reminder that creativity and self-sufficiency were often at odds with bureaucratic conformity. Today, Karen's 911 call was about to backfire in a way she could never have imagined. As the sirens grew louder and the neighbors' curious whispers turned into a murmur of anticipation, Ethan knew that this was his moment to send a message, a moment to show that the spirit of independence was stronger than any petty complaint. Today, Karen would learn that when you try to force conformity on a man who's built his life on freedom, karma has a way of turning the tables. And in that very moment, as the first light of dawn broke over his fields, Ethan's resolve solidified. The day was not going to end quietly. Crescent Meadows was a picture-perfect, gated community where every lawn was meticulously trimmed, every house painted in soothing pastels, and every resident was expected to adhere to the strict guidelines set forth by the local homeowners association, HOA. The rules were non-negotiable, down to the exact shade of green acceptable for front yards, and those who deviated were swiftly reprimanded or fined. For many, this created an environment of stifled creativity and forced uniformity. At the heart of this regimented community stood Karen Miller, universally known as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and always impeccably dressed in conservative business attire, Karen roamed Crescent Meadows with her ever-present clipboard and smartphone, ready to document any slight deviation from the prescribed norm. Her mission was self-appointed, to enforce an image of perfection in every corner of the neighborhood. Whether it was a decorative gnome placed at an angle or a farm stand that dared to display vibrant produce, nothing escaped her vigilant scrutiny. Ethan Caldwell, by contrast, was a lifelong resident who cherished the very freedom that the HOA sought to suppress. His farm, Caldwell Acres, was located on the outskirts of Crescent Meadows, a patch of rugged beauty where the natural world met generations of family tradition. Ethan's farm stand was his pride and joy, a humble but thriving market where locals came for fresh, organic vegetables, homemade preserves, and a slice of country charm. Every tomato, every jar of jam, every handcrafted item told the story of his forefathers and the relentless spirit that had kept his family's legacy alive. While many in Crescent Meadows quietly acquiesced to the HOA's demands, Ethan's heart beat to the rhythm of independence. He believed that art, nature, and entrepreneurial spirit were essential parts of life, values that could never be measured by uniformity or arbitrary rules. His farm stand was not just a business. It was an expression of his identity and a celebration of local, sustainable living. Over the years, Ethan had built a loyal customer base among those who admired his authenticity. But his success had also made him a target for the ever-watchful Karen, who saw his colorful displays and bustling market as a blatant violation of her meticulously maintained aesthetic. Fines for unauthorized property modifications and threats of legal action were nothing new. However, the latest blow came unexpectedly when Karen, determined to enforce her vision of community order, decided to call 911 on his farm stand, accusing him of causing a public disturbance. To Ethan, the 911 call was the final insult, a direct challenge to his right to conduct business on his own land. It wasn't merely about a phone call. It was about the systemic suppression of creativity and independence. In Crescent Meadows, conformity was king, and Ethan's very existence was a testament to the power of individuality. As he surveyed his property, a patchwork of fields, weathered barns, and a vibrant market that stood as a beacon of local pride, he knew that this battle was far from over. Karen's actions were designed to break him, but instead, they only fueled his determination. With a mind sharpened by years of adversity and a heart set on defending his heritage, Ethan prepared to fight back in a way that would not only reclaim his farm stand, but also send a resounding message to everyone in Crescent Meadows. Property rights and creative freedom were inviolable. And as the stage was set for what would become a dramatic showdown, Ethan's resolve was clear. He was ready to turn Karen's misguided call into the catalyst for a revolution. The controversy began to swell in the days following Karen's infamous 911 call. What was meant to be a routine enforcement of community standards had spiraled into a full-blown public spectacle. Neighbors, who had long whispered about the heavy-handed tactics of the HOA, began to rally behind Ethan. Online forums exploded with discussions about the incident, and hashtags such as #FarmStandFreedom and #NoMoreKaren started trending in Crescent Meadows. Ethan quickly gathered evidence. He secured copies of the 911 call logs, timestamps from his security cameras showing Karen's presence near his farm stand, and even audio recordings capturing her accusatory tirade. Every piece of data pointed to a single, undeniable truth. Karen had overstepped her bounds, using her authority not to protect the community, but to stifle a thriving local business that celebrated individuality and sustainability. Determined to counter this abuse, Ethan decided that merely filing a complaint with the HOA board wouldn't suffice. The fines and warnings that had been levied against him were nothing more than tools of intimidation designed to force compliance. Instead, he planned a bold counterstrike, one that would reclaim his property rights and expose the absurdity of the HOA's enforcement. The idea struck him one crisp morning while he was tending to his produce. If Karen could call 911 and cause a commotion over something as trivial as a farm stand, then Ethan would show her that the power of the people could not be suppressed. He began organizing meetings with other local farmers and residents who had suffered under the same arbitrary rules. Together, they compiled testimonies, gathered additional evidence, and started an online petition demanding that the HOA board review its policies and hold Karen accountable. As the digital dossier of complaints grew, Ethan realized that this was about more than just his farm stand. It was a battle for the soul of Crescent Meadows. Every fine, every baseless warning, was a small victory for conformity at the expense of creativity. And with each new piece of evidence he collected, Ethan's resolve deepened. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every resident who believed that local traditions and entrepreneurial spirit were worth protecting. The tension escalated further when the HOA board called an emergency meeting to address the mounting complaints. Ethan attended that meeting, armed with his digital dossier, and passionately argued that the fines imposed on his farm stand were not only unjust, but were a direct assault on the community's right to self-expression. His words struck a chord with many, and soon other residents began to share their own grievances about the HOA's draconian measures. Heated debates erupted in the meeting room, with some board members insisting that rules were rules, while others questioned whether Karen's enforcement had become a tool for personal vendettas rather than genuine community order. Karen, for her part, remained defiant. In a series of curt, dismissive emails, she accused Ethan of disrupting community harmony and claimed that his farm stand was a blight on the neighborhood's image. But the evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, call logs, and countless online testimonials painted a picture of a man defending his rights against an overzealous enforcer. In response to the mounting pressure, Ethan ramped up his efforts. He organized a peaceful protest outside the HOA office, where dozens of residents gathered to demand transparency and fairness. Signs reading, "Our land, our rights, and creativity over conformity" waved in the brisk wind. Local media began covering the protest, and soon the issue had transcended the boundaries of Crescent Meadows, sparking a wider debate about property rights and community governance in suburban America. Ethan's digital petition reached thousands of signatures, and influential local bloggers and community advocates joined the chorus, calling for reform. The momentum was undeniable. A groundswell of public opinion had turned against the arbitrary enforcement tactics of the HOA, and, in particular, against Karen's heavy-handed methods. The pressure mounted until the HOA board announced a final public hearing, a moment that would determine the fate of the contested fines and, more broadly, the future of creative freedom in Crescent Meadows. As the day of the hearing approached, Ethan knew that this showdown would be a turning point for the entire community. His fight had evolved from a personal battle over a farm stand into a symbol of resistance against bureaucratic tyranny. With every piece of evidence and every supportive comment online, he could sense that the tide was turning. Karen's authority, once seemingly unassailable, was beginning to crumble under the weight of the collective voice of the people. And Ethan, standing on the front line of this movement, felt that the promise of a new era was within reach. In the wake of the mounting public outcry, the digital revolution in Crescent Meadows gathered momentum at a staggering pace. Social media became a battleground where every video clip, every screenshot of Ethan's evidence, and every passionate comment by residents resonated far beyond the confines of the gated community. Hashtags like hashtag #FarmStandFreedom and hashtag #NoMoreKaren spread like wildfire, uniting homeowners who had long felt oppressed by the HOA's draconian enforcement. Local news outlets were quick to pick up the story, sending reporters to cover the dramatic developments on Ethan's farm. It's a classic showdown between individual rights and bureaucratic overreach, one anchor remarked during a live segment, while footage of Ethan speaking passionately at a community meeting captivated viewers. Interviews with residents revealed deep-seated frustrations, not just with Karen's tactics, but with a system that seemed to favor conformity over creativity. One resident, tears in his eyes, recalled being fined for a minor deviation in his garden's layout. "We're all tired of living in a neighborhood where our uniqueness is punished," he said. Inside the HOA board, the atmosphere was increasingly charged with tension. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed a stark division among board members. Some clung stubbornly to the old ways, arguing that strict adherence to the rules was necessary for maintaining property values. Others, however, were beginning to question whether Karen's personal vendettas had corrupted the very mission of the board. "We must protect our residents' rights, even if it means rethinking long-held policies," one board member was quoted as saying in a confidential memo. The board's internal conflict was mirrored in the public forums, where residents demanded accountability and transparency. Ethan continued to document every development. He updated his blog with detailed accounts of the events, shared security footage that captured Karen's dismissive responses, and posted live updates from the protest outside the HOA office. Every post was met with a surge of support. Digital petitions soared, garnering thousands of signatures from residents who had been waiting for a change. Local influencers and community activists joined the conversation, amplifying the message that personal freedom and property rights were non-negotiable. Karen's attempts to control the narrative backfired spectacularly. In a series of hastily recorded video statements, she insisted that her actions were for the benefit of the community, but her words were drowned out by the overwhelming digital evidence and the resounding public outcry. Every attempt she made to justify her fines was met with counterarguments from residents who shared their own stories of arbitrary penalties and invasive oversight. The public sentiment was clear. If one person could stand up to Karen, then everyone had the right to live and work freely on their own property. The situation reached a boiling point when the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the controversy once and for all. In the days leading up to the hearing, the community rallied like never before. Neighbors organized small, peaceful demonstrations outside local businesses, and flyers calling for reform were posted on community bulletin boards. Social media buzzed with images of Ethan's farm stand, a symbol of resilience and creative expression, standing in stark contrast to the sanitized, oppressive conformity of the HOA's vision. As the final hearing drew near, the digital evidence and community support became an unstoppable force. Residents from across Crescent Meadows shared their personal accounts, while local media coverage painted a vivid picture of a community on the cusp of transformation. Every video, every hashtag, every shared post reinforced the collective demand that the days of arbitrary fines and personal vendettas enforced by a single overzealous individual were coming to an end. Ethan's resolve hardened with each passing day. He knew that the outcome of the final hearing would not only determine the fate of his farm stand, but would also set a precedent for all residents of Crescent Meadows. The stakes were high, and the pressure was palpable. This was more than a battle for property rights. It was a fight for the soul of the community. And as the digital petition reached record-breaking numbers and the voices of the people crescendoed, it became clear that the power of individual expression was poised to triumph over bureaucratic control. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp, clear morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, each one there to witness the final public hearing that would decide the future of community enforcement policies. With a calm, yet unyielding presence, Councilwoman Nicole Rivera stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective hope of a community that had long been suppressed. After a comprehensive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed records of fines, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Rivera began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, who banned my neighbor's farm stand without any legitimate cause, were not driven by a genuine concern for community aesthetics or safety, but by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights to innovate, to express creativity, and to manage our own property must be upheld, and we will no longer tolerate arbitrary enforcement of outdated rules. A heavy silence settled over the room as Rivera continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions imposed in relation to these actions, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that have allowed such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines to ensure that every resident's rights are protected and that public authority is exercised with fairness and transparency. Today's decision is not just about one incident. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Meadows stands for justice and the freedom to live without oppressive interference. Her words struck a powerful chord, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, a stalwart defender of property rights, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and unwavering. "No resident should ever have their ability to express themselves or conduct their business on their own property undermined by personal vendettas. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that we will protect our rights at all costs. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our freedoms is rectified." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a shared call for change. Following his address, a senior official from the local regulatory agency presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports that confirmed Ethan Caldwell's farm stand operated entirely within legal parameters. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen Miller's fines were baseless, and her actions constituted a clear abuse of power. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Rivera concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where individual rights and creative expression are revered and where public authority is exercised with integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will not allow personal bias to dictate the rules of our community. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live and work freely on our own property. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The era of arbitrary fines and personal vendettas was over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Crescent Meadows underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and on social networks, igniting spirited debates about property rights, creative freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to innovate and express themselves without fear of oppressive interference. Hashtags like hashtag property rights, hashtag no more bullying, and hashtag art is freedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future free from the stifling grip of outdated regulations. Neighbors, who had long lived in fear of punitive fines and invasive inspections, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property in a way that reflected their individuality and dreams. "Our land is our legacy," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, "and we will protect it at all costs." The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Meadows would always honor the creative spirit and personal freedom of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and a responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, echoing the renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized to empower residents further. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices can reshape even the most entrenched systems. A local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite and demand a future where individual expression is celebrated. For Ethan Caldwell, and for every resident who had suffered under the oppressive rule of an overzealous enforcer, the journey from confrontation to resolution was deeply personal and transformative. My decision to stand up against Karen Miller's baseless fines and reclaim my right to operate my farm stand had not only restored my dignity, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Crescent Meadows. Digital evidence, shared stories, and a groundswell of public support transformed my personal battle into a beacon of hope for the entire community. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the inherent dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered beneath the soft glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Creative Expression" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only our victory over arbitrary interference, but also the enduring spirit of individual freedom, Councilwoman Rivera proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our rights and ensuring that creativity and innovation remain the hallmarks of Crescent Meadows. As each new day dawned over our transformed community, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen's 911 call against my farm stand backfired with a sweet twist of karma became a rallying cry, a reminder that when personal freedom is under attack, the power of unity and creative resistance will always prevail. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, justice, and the right to live and work freely would forever be cherished. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over Crescent Meadows, it carried with it the promise that our community would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression shone as brightly as the first light of day.